You need to step back.
Are you okay? Let me help you. I need to protect my baby.
The sound you are about to hear lasted less than 1 second, but it ended a 22-year career, exposed an 11-year lie, and sent one man back to a country that had been waiting for him since 2015. A hand, a face, a gasp from row 14. Somewhere over Tennessee, at 31,000 feet, a United States airline captain raised his hand and struck a pregnant woman across the face in front of 43 witnesses and one very steady phone camera. He thought he was untouchable. Men like Grant Holloway always do. He had no idea that the woman bleeding from her lip in seat 12C was about to become the reason his entire life came apart, thread by thread, until the only thing left standing was the truth he had been outrunning for 11 years. My name is not important. What happened on Meridian Airlines Flight 741 is, so let's go back to the beginning, 3 days before that slap, when Simone Carter was just a tired, hopeful woman trying to get to her mother's hospital bed in time. If a story like this feels like it needed to happen for justice to finally show up, stay with me until the end. And if you believe people like Grant Holloway always think the rules are for someone else, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Simone Carter was 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, and exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. She had spent 6 years in the United States Navy as a logistics specialist, the kind of job nobody glamorizes in movies, but the kind that keeps entire fleets fed, fueled, and functioning. She left the service with an honorable discharge, a quiet pride she rarely spoke about, and a teaching certificate she earned during her final 2 years in uniform, studying between shifts. For the last 5 years, she had taught 3rd grade at a public elementary school outside Chicago. Her classroom had a reading corner she built herself out of milk crates and donated pillows. Her students called her Miss Simone. Their parents called her the reason their kids stopped hating school. Her husband, Marcus Carter, worked as an electrician and was, by Simone's own description, the calmest man she had ever met. They had been trying for a baby for 4 years, 2 losses before this pregnancy. This one had made it past 20 weeks, then 30, and now she was 30 weeks along and terrified in the specific, quiet way that only comes after loss. 3 days before the flight, Simone's phone rang at 11:40 at night. Her mother, Dolores, had collapsed in her kitchen in Atlanta, a ruptured appendix that had gone untreated too long, now septic, now an emergency surgery scheduled for the following evening. Dolores was 71. She lived alone since Simone's father passed. There was no one else to be there. Marcus wanted to go with her. Simone told him to stay. Someone needed to keep the house, keep the dog fed, keep the nursery painting on schedule. She would be fine. It was a 2-hour flight. She had flown pregnant before. She booked the earliest ticket she could find on Meridian Airlines, economy, aisle seat, and packed a bag with shaking hands. She did not know that the man flying that plane had already decided, long before she ever stepped on board, that a woman like her did not deserve his patience. Grant Holloway was 51 years old and had been flying for Meridian Airlines for 11 years. On paper, he was a model employee, 15,000 flight hours, 0 reported incidents, a captain's bar earned in record time. Colleagues described him as confident, occasionally abrasive, but competent enough that nobody pushed back too hard. What his personnel file did not say, because it had been carefully scrubbed from every record Meridian ever checked, was that Grant Holloway was not born Grant Holloway. He was born Gareth Holloway in Vancouver, Canada, and in 2014 he was working as a regional pilot for a small Canadian carrier when he assaulted a fellow crew member during a layover dispute. The woman he struck, a first officer half his seniority, pressed charges. Transport Canada revoked his commercial license pending trial. Rather than face the hearing, Gareth Holloway disappeared. 8 months later, Grant Holloway applied for a pilot position in the United States, using a manufactured identity built around a real Social Security number he had purchased from a broker in Buffalo, New York. Meridian's background check in 2015 was thinner than it should have been. He passed. He flew. For 11 years, nobody looked twice. He rebuilt himself as an American captain with a spotless record, but the thing that made him dangerous in Vancouver never actually left him. It just learned to hide better. Colleagues who worked closely with him over the years would later describe a pattern they had normalized without realizing it: a short fuse with junior crew, a particular impatience with any passenger who questioned him, a tendency to escalate faster with certain people than with others. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody filed a report. Until Simone Carter sat down in seat 12C. The first sign came at the gate. Simone was flying with a medical documentation letter from her OB/GYN, standard practice for pregnant travelers past 30 weeks, confirming she was cleared to fly and requesting standard accommodations if needed. She handed it to the gate agent as a courtesy, not knowing that Captain Holloway happened to be standing nearby reviewing the manifest. He glanced at her, glanced at the letter, and said, loud enough for the people behind her to hear, "We're not running a maternity ward up there. If you're feeling that fragile, maybe you shouldn't be flying today." The gate agent, a young woman named Katie Reyes, looked mortified. Simone, who had spent 6 years in the military, learning how to absorb disrespect from men who outranked her and keep her composure, simply said, "I have clearance to fly, Captain. Thank you," and boarded without another word. Katie Reyes would remember one more small detail later, the kind of thing that means nothing until it means everything. As Simone walked down the jet bridge, Katie called after the captain to confirm the final head count. "Captain Holloway," she said. He did not turn right away. For just a beat, less than a second, he kept looking at his clipboard as if the name had been aimed at someone else. Then he turned, said yes, and walked into the cockpit. Katie would think nothing of it for 19 more days. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it soon enough, and so would the rest of the country. The first 40 minutes were uneventful. Simone settled into 12C, made small talk with the woman beside her, a college student named Ashley Monroe heading home for spring break, and tried to sleep despite the anxiety sitting in her chest like a stone. Somewhere over Kentucky, the plane hit moderate turbulence, sharp enough that the seatbelt sign chimed, and a flight attendant nearly lost her footing in the aisle. Simone gripped her armrest, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The turbulence passed, but it left her rattled. She flagged down a flight attendant, a warm, quick-moving woman named Priya Nathaniel, and asked quietly if there was any way to adjust the seatbelt to sit lower, beneath her belly rather than across it, which was standard guidance for pregnant passengers and printed in the airline's own safety materials. Priya was happy to help. She retrieved an extender and knelt to assist. That was when Captain Holloway, who had stepped out of the cockpit to use the restroom, noticed the interaction and stopped in the aisle. "What's the holdup back here?" he said. Priya explained calmly. Holloway's expression shifted into something colder. "She had a note at the gate, too," he said. Not to Priya, but loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "I already dealt with this once today." Simone felt her face go hot with a familiar, exhausting mixture of embarrassment and restraint. "Sir, I'm just adjusting my belt. It's standard for pregnancy." "What's standard?" Holloway said. "Is that when the seatbelt sign is on, you keep it on the way it's designed. I don't care what stage of anything you're in. Ashley Monroe, the college student beside her, later told investigators she remembers thinking the captain's tone did not match the situation at all. It was disproportionate, personal, like something underneath had already been simmering before he ever reached row 12. Here is the moment I want you to sit with for a second before we go further, because it matters. Have you ever watched someone in a position of power escalate a situation that never needed to escalate, and known, right in that instant, that it was never really about the rule they were quoting? If that has ever happened to you, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what you did in that moment. Because Simone's next move is the reason everything that follows happened the way it did. Simone did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She simply said, calmly and clearly, in the voice she used to diffuse arguments between 8-year-olds every single day of her professional life, "Captain, I'm not trying to cause a problem. I have a doctor's note. I just need the belt positioned correctly for my baby's safety." Something in Holloway's face changed. Witnesses would later describe it differently depending on where they sat. Some said his jaw tightened. Some said he went pale, then red. What every single witness agreed on, without exception, was what happened next. He reached down and he slapped her. Open palm, across the left side of her face, hard enough that her head snapped sideways into the window frame. The sound cracked through the cabin. For nearly 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the plane erupted. Ashley Monroe screamed. Priya Nathaniel physically stepped between Holloway and Simone, shouting for the first officer. A retired firefighter 3 rows back was out of his seat before the second officer even reached the aisle. And in row 16, a man named David Ferris, an insurance adjuster from Nashville who had been recording a video call with his teenage daughter, turned his phone toward the aisle out of pure reflex. He caught 19 seconds. It was enough. Simone sat frozen, one hand pressed to her stinging cheek, the other wrapped protectively around her belly, tears sliding silently down her face, not from pain alone, but from the sheer disbelief that this was actually happening at 31,000 feet, with nowhere to go. The first officer, a younger pilot named Officer Daniel Reyes, no relation to the gate agent, came out of the cockpit within seconds and physically pulled Holloway back toward the front of the plane. Holloway was shouting something about disrespect, about being provoked, about needing to maintain control of his aircraft. Nobody was listening to him anymore. Officer Reyes made the call himself. The flight would divert to Nashville, the nearest major airport, and Holloway would be relieved of duty for the remainder of the flight, an almost unheard of move for a first officer to make against his own captain. But Reyes would later tell investigators there was simply no version of the flight continuing with Holloway anywhere near the controls or the cabin. Priya Nathaniel stayed with Simone the entire descent, holding her hand, monitoring her for signs of shock, and radioing ahead so paramedics would be waiting on the tarmac. Simone kept whispering the same thing over and over, not about herself, but about the baby. Is the baby okay? Is the baby okay? When the plane landed in Nashville 22 minutes later, it was met not just by paramedics, but by airport police, a Meridian Airlines regional manager who had been alerted mid-flight, and, within the hour, more media attention than anyone on that aircraft could have imagined. David Ferris had already uploaded his video. By the time Simone was in a Nashville hospital being checked over by an OB/GYN on call, confirming the baby's heartbeat was strong and steady, the video had 11,000 views. By the time she was released 4 hours later, with a mild concussion diagnosis and instructions to rest, it had 4 million. By midnight, it was the top trending topic in the country. The headline nearly every outlet ran with was almost identical to the words strangers online were already using. A captain slapped a pregnant black woman on a commercial flight. The video showed everything. It showed Simone's calm, reasonable tone in the seconds before impact. It showed the slap itself, unmistakable, undeniable. It showed the immediate chaos, the first officer's intervention, and Simone's trembling hands wrapped around her stomach. Meridian Airlines released a statement within 6 hours, calling the incident, in their words, deeply disturbing and completely unacceptable, and confirming Holloway had been placed on immediate unpaid suspension pending investigation. It was not enough for the public, and it was nowhere near enough for what was about to be uncovered. Within 48 hours, the hashtag Justice for Simone had been used over 2 million times. Civil rights attorneys reached out, national morning shows offered her airtime, producers calling Marcus directly, one show reportedly offering a 5-figure appearance fee. Simone turned down every single one. Instead, on the 4th night, sitting up in a hospital bed with Marcus asleep in the chair beside her, she asked for a legal pad and wrote a letter by hand, not to a network, to the Federal Aviation Administration directly. She was not interested in going viral a second time, she told Marcus when he woke and asked what she was doing. She wanted the people who could actually pull Holloway's license to hear it from her. In her own words, before some producer packaged her pain into a 6-minute segment. The letter was 3 pages long. It did not ask for sympathy. It asked one direct question. How does a man with his record end up in that cockpit at all? And who is responsible for making sure it never happens again? That letter was later entered into the FAA's official case file, and 2 investigators would tell colleagues it was the reason the review moved as fast as it did. What neither Simone nor the investigators yet knew was that her question had a far stranger answer than any of them expected. The Federal Aviation Administration opened a formal review within 72 hours, a rare and rapid response driven almost entirely by public pressure and the sheer volume of video evidence. Meridian's own Internal Affairs Division launched a parallel investigation into Holloway's full employment history. That is when the first inconsistency surfaced, and it started with something almost embarrassingly small. Patricia Wong had worked in Meridian's HR archive for 9 years. Pulling Holloway's original 2015 employment file was routine, the kind of task she could do half asleep. She typed the name of his listed prior employer, a small Canadian regional carrier, into the corporate verification database and expected the usual green check mark. Instead, she got nothing, no match. She tried again, assuming a typo, still nothing. She sat with that for a moment longer than she needed to. Companies dissolve. Records get messy over a decade, but something about the exact spelling nagged at her, close enough to a real defunct airline to have passed a glance in 2015, not close enough to survive a modern search. She printed the page, walked it to her supervisor's office, and said 4 words that would end up costing a man his freedom. "This doesn't look right." Her supervisor forwarded it to legal within the hour. Legal, already drowning in public pressure and desperate to get ahead of further embarrassment, made one phone call that afternoon to a former FBI background specialist named Robert Ashford. Ashford had spent 18 years untangling exactly this kind of thing, and when he opened Holloway's file for the first time, he later told a colleague, something felt off before he had even read a single page. Too clean, too perfectly consistent. Real histories have small contradictions in them. This one had none. It took him 6 days to find out why. The Social Security number on file for Grant Holloway had originally been issued in 1981 to an infant in Buffalo, New York, who had died of pneumonia before his 2nd birthday in 1983. It was, Ashford quickly recognized, a classic identity theft technique, sometimes called ghosting, where a deceased child's unused social security number is purchased and repurposed by an adult decades later. Cross-referencing facial recognition against a Canadian aviation incident database that Ashford had access to through a contact at Transport Canada, the match came back within hours. Grant Holloway was Gareth Holloway, the same man who had assaulted a fellow first officer during a layover dispute in Vancouver in 2014. The same man whose Canadian commercial pilot's license had been suspended pending a criminal assault trial he never showed up for. A trial that, under Canadian law, still had an active bench warrant attached to it more than a decade later because he had simply vanished before it could be resolved. He had spent 11 years flying American commercial aircraft, accumulating 15,000 flight hours, earning a captain's rank, all under a stolen identity, all while a warrant for his arrest sat untouched in a Vancouver courthouse. The woman he had assaulted in 2014, now a senior captain herself at a different Canadian airline, was contacted by investigators and confirmed the identification within minutes of seeing his current photograph. She had spent 11 years believing her attacker had simply disappeared. She had no idea he had been flying, under a new name, in the country next door the entire time. The Federal Aviation Administration's ruling came 19 days after the slap. Grant Holloway's commercial pilot's license was permanently revoked, not only for the assault on Simone Carter, but for the broader finding that his license itself had never been legitimately valid in the first place, having been obtained through fraudulent identity documentation. That finding triggered something far larger than a workplace termination. Federal prosecutors charged him with identity fraud, wire fraud related to 11 years of income earned under a false social security number, and aggravated assault stemming from the incident on Flight 741. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, notified as part of the standard interagency process once his true Canadian citizenship was confirmed, placed an immediate detainer on him. 2 agents came to his rented condo outside Charlotte on a Tuesday morning. Neighbors later told reporters he answered the door still in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, and that for a moment he simply stared at the paperwork in the lead agent's hand without saying anything at all. When the agent read him his true name back to him, Gareth Holloway, out loud on his own doorstep, he reportedly did not correct them. He just closed his eyes, according to one witness, like a man setting down something heavy he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it had weight. Because his entire legal presence in the United States had been built on a fabricated identity, he held no legitimate visa, no legitimate work authorization, nothing that could survive contact with the truth. He had, in the government's own language, no lawful status in the United States whatsoever, and never had. Grant Holloway, once a respected captain with 15,000 flight hours, pled guilty to reduce his federal sentencing exposure and was ordered removed from the United States. Under a standing extradition agreement, he was transferred directly into Canadian custody upon deportation, where the 11-year-old bench warrant for the original assault in Vancouver was waiting for him, along with new charges related to the assault on Simone. He did not fly himself out of the country. He was walked onto a government transport in restraints, the same hands that struck a pregnant woman at 31,000 feet now cuffed in front of him, headed back to face the exact consequence he had spent 11 years running from. A federal marshal who processed the transfer told a local reporter, off the record, that Holloway asked only one question the entire flight. He asked if anyone had checked on the baby. If you have made it this far, this is usually the part where I ask you to hit subscribe. And I will, because stories like Simone's only reach the people who need to hear them when this channel keeps growing. But more than that, I want you to sit with what just happened here. 11 years of a lie held together perfectly, until one moment of unearned cruelty against the wrong woman pulled every thread loose at once. While all of this unfolded in courtrooms and federal filings, Simone Carter was doing something far less dramatic and far more important. She was healing. Her mother, Dolores, came through her surgery successfully, the same week the video went viral, recovering in an Atlanta hospital while her daughter's face was being discussed on national news 2 states away. Simone split her time between Dolores's bedside and doctor's appointments monitoring the baby, who, despite everything, remained healthy and strong. Meridian Airlines settled with Simone privately within 6 weeks, the terms undisclosed, though Simone's attorney confirmed publicly that a portion of the settlement was directed toward funding pregnancy accommodation training for flight crews across the airline's entire fleet, a policy change Simone herself insisted on as a condition of the agreement. She did not want a payout. She wanted no other pregnant woman to sit in that seat and hear those words again. Priya Nathaniel, the flight attendant who had knelt beside her with the seatbelt extender and never left her side, became a close friend. Officer Daniel Reyes, the first officer who made the difficult call to relieve his own captain mid-flight, was promoted and later commended publicly by the airline for what leadership called, in their words, the hardest right decision in the company's recent history. 2 months after the incident, Simone gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She and Marcus named her Harper. Simone posted a single photo online, her daughter's tiny hand wrapped around her father's finger, with a caption that read simply, "She's here, and she's safe." And that's all that ever mattered. There is a version of this story that ends with Grant Holloway getting fired and nothing more. And honestly, for a long time, that is how most stories like this one end. A quiet suspension, a settlement with a non-disclosure clause, a name that fades out of the headlines within a week while the person responsible finds work somewhere else and starts the pattern over again. That is not what happened here, and it is not what happened here specifically because Simone Carter, in the single worst moment of her pregnancy, stayed calm enough and strong enough and clear enough to make sure the truth could not be buried. She never raised her voice. She never gave anyone an excuse to make this about her tone instead of his hand. Grant Holloway is currently in a Canadian federal facility awaiting trial on the original 2014 assault charge, alongside new charges tied to what happened on Flight 741. Simone Carter is home in Chicago, teaching 3rd grade again, with her daughter Harper often napping in the reading corner she built with her own hands. If this story meant something to you tonight, I would genuinely love to know which part stayed with you the longest. Was it the slap itself or the 11 years he thought he had gotten away with? Let me know down in the comments, and if you want more stories like this one, stories about the moment cruelty finally runs out of road, subscribe to Odyssey Stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you in the next story.